Hi, and good evening. I'm Yaakov Katz, a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, and welcome to another session or episode of our inside analysis and look at Israel's war against Hamas. Tonight, I'm beginning on my own. I'll be joined a bit later by Shuki Friedman. Shuki is the vice president and director of JPPI. He's a former legal expert in the prime minister's office and has actually been serving over the last few weeks in the IDF reserves. One of his main jobs is actually on the legal aspects of this war and working on the international legal restrictions and how the IDF can continue to operate, conduct its missions, and achieve its goals while meeting those different conditions that are required according to international law. But to start us off today, and this is why we're a bit of a slimmer panel, I had a fascinating conversation earlier with former Supreme Court Justice Eliakim Rubinstein. Justice Rubinstein was the Attorney General to the State of Israel for a number of years. He was the legal advisor to Israel's Ministry of Defense. He worked for many years in the Foreign Ministry, was one of the delegates to the Camp David talks back in 1979 when peace was made with Egypt, was the cabinet secretary for former Prime Minister or then Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. So he's one of these Israelis who's kind of been everywhere, seen it all, and pretty much done it all, and wrapped up a couple of years ago when he stepped down, I think 3 or 4 years ago, from the bench at the mandatory age of 70. Justice Rubinstein, because of that background, obviously has a lot of experience in all these issues that we're thinking about and talking about. And as I'm sure you all are watching what's happening in the northern Gaza Strip, where the IDF is operating, and particularly when it comes to the issue of the hospitals and the Al Shifa hospital, which is clearly one of the targets that Israel would like to be able to go into, but finds its hands tied because of the fact that there are still so many civilians who are inside that hospital and it's not willing to evacuate voluntarily. What does a country do in scenarios like this? How can a country like Israel achieve its military aims and objectives while at the same time ensuring that civilian lives are looked after, are cared for? And I think that people who really know and really do care about this story know just to what length the IDF does go and what restrictions the state of Israel does put on itself. Well, there is nothing like talking to one of the people who really has been there since pretty much the beginning of it all, and to hear from him how he views things. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is my discussion with former Supreme Court Justice Eliakim Rubinstein. Justice Rubinstein, thank you very much for joining us here at JPPI. What I thought we'd start with is the whole legal battle that goes on here, right? And everyone sees the troops on the ground in Gaza. We know about the diplomatic battle that Israel needs to fight for legitimacy and to have more time to continue to fight in Gaza. But there's also a whole legal front to any war, which includes the legal advisors who assist the IDF, but also the operation itself, where we have a lot of criticism that Israel is violating international law, and the day after, when we can presume that the Palestinians and others will go after Israeli soldiers and commanders and politicians in international tribunals. So how do you see this whole legal front that Israel also faces in this conflict?
Well, before responding, let me join in sending condolences to the bereaved families. We've been visiting, my wife and myself, families that we know and families which we don't know, and going to funerals, so on. It's I think for me, it's the worst period I've lived through, I think, in this respect. Although I'm kind of a veteran, I was a soldier in 67, 73, not a combat soldier, but in the army. So it's an unending pain and unending agony. But to your question, lawyers always, there are people who say, I'm looking for a one-armed lawyer, because all lawyers always say, on one hand, on the other hand, In this particular situation, I think any honest lawyer would say that it is a one-armed lawyer. It is that our case is very sound if you want to be fair and honest. Because in international law, other than domestic law, the politics around the attitudes is obvious. But speaking in legal terms, what Hamas has been doing for a long time, but has done in this barbarous way on October 7th is both a violation of laws of armed conflict, the humanitarian law, the treaty against genocide, and the international law stipulations concerning kidnapping. So you have 4 points, and each of them can be easily demonstrated to enter our territorial area that is not, occupied or administered or whatever. It's the territory of the state of Israel, sovereign territory, and kill people in their beds, in their homes, young or old, babies, just name it, and then going to a social party, and that kibbutz re'ut and re'im, and then slaughter people just came to celebrate. There's no other way than describing it as war crimes of all kinds. And whoever says something else is just lying or coming with the wrong intentions. Then the question arises, which is now the main topic, the response. The fact that we've been in Gaza and doing the work that the army and our security forces are performing. There are criteria, and the main one is proportionality. Nobody
Right.
knows exactly what proportionality is. I mean, as some people would say, what does it mean go into Gaza and kill 1,400 people from Gaza? That's the proportional thing, because it's an eye, ayin tachat ayin, eye
For an eye.
versus eye. That's not proportionality. Proportionality is mainly common sense. How do you defend yourself? Self-defense in its pure way, and make sure, as far as you can, that this will not be repeated. And of course, you ought to be cautious in terms of civilian population. And there's this is. I remember when I was Attorney General many years ago, I used to repeat in cabinet meetings the need to be cautious on civilians.
Mhm.
When we, let's say, did Air Force, we had Air Force operations in Lebanon. And I remember one Sunday, I had a meeting with a few generals who came for another topic, and they said to me, look, you always talk about civilians. Yesterday, we could do away with the whole Hamas leadership in Gaza. I speak of 2003 or something like that. And we didn't do it because of one reason, because the meeting was in a civilian building where there like forget how many, like 8 floors, and this is in the 4th floor. So if you go after them, you go after the civilians of the building, and we didn't do it. So the question of how to treat civilians becomes more complicated with the Hamas modus operandi, which is, and this is now proven, there's no question about it, using civilian uh, locations, could be schools, could be hospitals, could be public offices, whatever, uh, for their military activities, which means uh, there is no way to avoid affect your operation will affect civilians if they continue this way. What the IDF is doing, what our forces are doing, they're asking people to leave Gaza, right, to leave the northern part of Gaza. If you're not there, you're not going to be affected. That's not a simple response, because the problems are not simple, but it's a response. And I don't think there's any decent international lawyer who wouldn't ask himself, how would I do if I had to decide or to advise, or how would any country do? Let's say, God forbid, if somebody from Mexico comes into the Texas and kills 1,400 Texans, what would the U.S. government do? What would any civilian free world country do if they face the same situation? We do live in a difficult environment, but I think that our legal legal basis is sound. Of course, we have to be alert all the time, because we do not see Gaza, the Gaza population as our enemy. We see Hamas as our enemy. How to minimize losses to the civilians there, but Hamas couldn't care less about their life. And it's, what I'm saying is all facts. It's not propaganda, because if they, people say, "Oh, propaganda," if they try to prevent people from going south, that is to stay, while knowing that their headquarters, their munitions, their guns, whatever, are within this population, what did they say to this population? Just a second, let me.
But you're right. They do that knowingly, and they do it purposely. But I'm wondering, one of the, we've seen this in like previous operations, right, where the UN will come out with a fact-finding commission, or there will be a report like the Goldstone report after Operation Cast Lead in 2009. And they could accuse us of war crimes and us of genocide and crimes against humanity. And then we could have situations where generals and soldiers and politicians won't be able to travel in different countries around the world. Is that just the reality that we have to come to terms with? Or is there something that we can do as a country to fight that?
Well, I'm sure there are people. I'm not today part of any consultation machinery, so I'm not privy to what's going on internally. I'm sure that the IDF and the foreign ministry, other government jurists are looking at the picture. As far as complaints to The Hague and all of that, I was the chair of our delegation in 1998 to the Rome conference that established the International Criminal Court. And in my speech there, which I think it's even on the web, I said that we are afraid of politicization of this court. That's why we ultimately didn't join it, although Jews were among the main architects and the supporters and the drafters of post-World War II treaties, and the genocide treaty was initiated by a Jewish refugee from Poland, the lawyer Raphael Lemkin of blessed memory, who had almost alone to convince that this is important. And now the fact that the Hamas is after Jews. I killed Jews. Somebody calls his parents. I killed so that many Jews and so on. Puts it also in the category of genocide. But coming back to the Hague, we have arguments against their involvement. One is connected with jurisdiction, and I won't go into the details. And the other is, why was the Hague Court established? For countries that do not have the rule of law, for countries that are totalitarian, that wouldn't care about it.
And as you know, we have a rule of law. You were a member of our highest court up until recently, so yes.
Again, please.
I said you were a member of the highest court in the country.
Yes,
so of course
I
we
was
have
a member
rule
of the
of
High
law.
Court,
Exactly.
and I also was one of those who really struggled against weakening the High Court. But I won't go into that. That's not the right time.
Right.
So Israel has a rule of law, has a strong Attorney General, and a strong Supreme Court, a strong judiciary. Of course, nothing is perfect, but we stand in the front line, or we can be compared to any judicial and enforcement authorities around the world, and we are respected in that respect. So people will try to give us a difficult time. I have no doubt, but right. If we speak legally, we have good responses. Politically, as you know, the world is much more complicated, and I don't see myself as an expert on that, but as far as the legal side, we have, I think, professionally and morally good answers. And indeed, it has been a difficult period from any point of view. I must say, I'm a son of a Holocaust survivor. And my father lost his family. They were all shot into a mass grave in the little town Shtetl in Belarus. And the whole Shtetl was shot into that mass grave, the whole Jewish population. And seeing what happened in the kibbutzim and moshavim, the villages around the Gaza boundary, I felt a taste of Nazi operations. A taste, more than a taste, We lost, by the way, a family relative, an 88-year-old woman who was all her life, since the age of 16. She joined Kibbutz Be'eri. She's been there for all her life, and she was slaughtered. And we went to visit here in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, a woman that we don't know, but we felt the urge to visit. She had twins. Her name is Vaknin. She had twins, and that's all she had in terms of children. And both were assassinated in the party in
The music festival.
that night. So that morning, in fact. So it's a Nazi-like operation, and people should know that, because I don't have to mince words about it. Now, of course, we sometimes commit mistakes, but not this time. This time it is, in my view, the blame is clear-cut put on the other side, and I do know that the IDF tries to minimize civilian losses, and I hope will be successful both in eradicating Hamas and in avoiding as many casualties as we can, because we didn't make the population of Gaza our enemy. We did make the Hamas is our enemy. Now, much of the reaction internationally now, and you can understand people seeing a population moving and so on, that there's criticism, but I think responsible people, and mainly politicians, leaders, I don't know, the French president, all kinds of, or UN Secretary General, people whose voices are heard, should be cautious in what they say, and should learn the facts to their and the president of France was here, and he saw what was going on. There is also, and I'm not speaking now of President Macron or anybody else. I'm speaking in general terms. There's anti-Semitism. You know, an anecdote. In 1987, I was a cabinet secretary. The prime minister was Yitzhak Shamir. I was cabinet secretary to Shamir and Rabin. This is the Shamir era, and I read a lot of material on anti-Semitism, which I have been watching since the 70s in the foreign ministry, and then now I'm the cabinet secretary. I wrote a memo to Shamir that we should start monitoring in a more organized, harmonious way what's going on in this respect, because the monitoring at the time was kind of sporadic between various branches of government. And Shamir said, okay, and I established an interagency forum chaired by me that was issuing reports periodically to the government on what's going on, and we had all the agents. Shimon Peres was my friend. In fact, he was even in our wedding 47 years ago, when I was a young deputy legal advisor in the Ministry of Defense, and he was the minister. Shimon Peres was the foreign minister in 87, and I asked him for a representative to the forum that we established, the interagency group. And what did he say to me? And that it's so typical, his optimism, his optimistic worldview. Said, Eli, governments have to deal with the present and the future. Anti-Semitism is the past. Why should we deal with that?
Unfortunately, it's not, though.
And he later changed his mind, but many of us were hoping, even in my memo to Shamir, I wrote it, many of us were hoping that the shame of the Holocaust, of what the European civilized country Germany did to, and its helpers all around did to the Jewish people, would kind of push to the gutter anti-Semitism. And maybe for a few years it did, but it changed soon, and here we are. So I assume that you cannot eradicate anti-Semitism totally. It goes back to the Esther book in the Bible, Haman, and the idea that there's this dispersed nation that is different from others. You have to kill them. So it's there, but there are ways, and I don't say it's easy to respond strongly and to make those who make the accusation ashamed. And it could be educationally, it could be legally, it could be politically and in public diplomacy, but one shouldn't despair. One shouldn't think, no way to do away with it, so just lift your hands up. No.
It has to be a fight. I want to thank you very much, Justice Eliakim Rubinstein, for joining us at JPPI. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So that was a bit long, that I'll admit, compared to previous interviews that we've done in the past, but also very interesting in the sense of looking at what are the different challenges that we're facing, and how can Israel deal with these different types of legal challenges that it has. So Shuki, you're with us. If you just unmute, and you have to turn on your camera and we can see you as well. I'm curious, one of the big issues that we're facing right now, obviously, is the issue of the Shifa hospital. And Israel, has to deal with the questions of this being a legitimate military target, obviously, because even though it's civilian, it has been converted and is being used for military purposes. How does this work, from maybe a little more behind the scenes? Like Justice Rubinstein spoke to us at a very high hypothetical level, but you're theoretical almost. But you're getting your hands dirty on these things also from past experience. I'm curious how this process works within the chain of command and how the different approval process is done.
So naturally, I wouldn't address the current situation and how exactly it works now, but basically the IDF is fully bind itself to the international law and humanitarian law, and Justice Rubinstein described how proportionality is hard to force and to evaluate, but basically the army adopted manuals to follow, and whatever you want to act or to target, whether it be a mosque, whether it be a house, whether it be another type of target, and in a hospital, you should follow a certain manual that instruct you to the limits and the borderlines you can work within to, on one hand, achieve your military goal, which is permitted by humanitarian law, but on the other hand, not breach the law and not go extremely out of proportionality. And it always work like this when you have a minor operation, like now in the West Bank, but also in wars.
Right.
You know, the item saying that when the cannons shooting, the laws are not obliging, but Justice Park said that in Israel, even though that when the cannon shooting, we are following the law internationally and locally. So for Shifa and for other occasions, and you can follow how Israel act in practice. We restrict ourselves and follow the law and verify and ensure that we do the maximum effort to reduce the killing or hurting civilians, in this case, patients and others that not involved in the terror and not competent. And therefore, in practice, you work to achieve the military goals, but your hands are not bind, but do restrict in some ways, so you will find yourself in the borders of international law.
Well, one thing that I think, and Justice Rubenstein kind of spoke about this also, is this concept proportionality, right? Now, people tend to look at it and they're like, okay, proportionality is how many they killed of you, it's proportional for you to kill of them. It's like, according to that distorted logic, they killed 1,400 Israelis. We go in, we kill 1,400 Palestinians, and we're done. No, of course, that's not what it is. The question of proportionality, which I think a lot of people fail to keep in mind, or to know, or to remember, is that when you look at a value of a target, it's not proportionality of what is, what they did to me. It's a question of the value, the military value of the target, versus the harm that will take place to civilians, collateral damage, or what have you. So it's each target, essentially, based on that, has to be reviewed and has to have some sort of legal assessment, unless, of course, it's a gunman running down the street shooting at you right away. Of course, the soldiers have that leeway, but targets like Shifa, like others, have to have a serious legal review, right?
So basically, there is sort of a general proportionality, the question of what sort of attack you've been attacked, and what is a proportional response based on UN Charter that enable you to self-protect yourself or self-defend yourself per an attack occurred against you. But you're right, when you're talking about specific targets like hospitals, like schools and others, you definitely look at the target itself, the casualties, and what you would achieve. Now, again, because it's very subjective, for one person, one commander, the importance of the achievement is very high, whereas the others might think that it's not so important, it's more minor. And then how do you assess this subjective parameter of proportionality? And therefore, armies in Israel as well adopted certain rules and manuals and enable the commanders, enable the legal advisor to follow. And this way, when you start the operation, you already, and you mentioned it with your conversation with interview with Justice Rubenstein, you look to the future, and you as Israel used to, and we have a track record of it, you're sure that one day the war will end, and someone will try to drag you to persecution in international tribunals, like the ICC, like other tribunals, or double jurisdiction of some court somewhere, and you're aware of that. And therefore, not only because the legal risk, but also because you want to bind the law, but you also know that there is a legal risk. And therefore, you not only try to achieve the concrete military objectives we want to achieve, but also to prevent the legal risk that will come in the future. And we met it. We had the Offer Tetzukah 2008 preparation when we got Goldstone report, and then we have a cliff edge in 2014, where there have been some states approach to the ICC trying to open investigations and persecution procedure against Israel. And there is already an open investigation that's been opened by Fatwa Bensouda as a previous prosecutor. So we're already around. And the day after the war ends, we'll find ourselves defending what we've done through these weeks or months within international court or other legal tribunals worldwide. And I know how we work today. I have very high confidence that legally we will be able to confront it.
It's actually, I mean, it's, what people also, it's such a big issue. The former chief of staff Kochavi, for example, was supposed to go study at one point in the UK, had to cancel that and go study after he was a brigade commander in the US. Doron Almog, who's the current chairman of the Jewish Agency, there's the famous story of when he landed in London, was told not to get off the plane because of things that he did, operations he oversaw back in 2005. This is it's a real threat. It's a real issue that Israeli soldiers and Israeli commanders and by the way, Israeli politicians as well.
It's true.
This,
Israeli politicians have been a history,
and who are making these decisions in the cabinet, and that's why it's so important. And it's only, and I know you were dealing, JPPI was dealing a lot with this, and I hate to laugh, but let's imagine just for a moment, and with this we'll end, but just for a moment, had the judicial reform, the overhaul gone through, and in whether it would have been right that it would weaken the courts or not right, it depends who you would speak to in Israel, but at least on the international stage, there was a perception that it was going to weaken Israel's judicial system. And as Eliakim Rubinstein himself said, we have a rule of law, so we have a defense. Now, what if that had happened, Shuki? The world would have thought we would not have right now rule of law. It would be much worse.
The question, I don't think that Minister Levin and other people that wanted to promote this reform want to completely abolish the rule of law. The more important point is quite different. One of the major ways Israel protected herself through the years against persecution in the ICC and other tribunals is complementarity, which means if the state have legal procedures or investigation procedure to investigate war crimes that being committed by its soldiers through the battlefield, and there is international confidence that these investigations, prosecutions, procedures are reliable and serious, the chance that the prosecutor in The Hague or other prosecutors worldwide will decide to open investigation internationally is lower. So if you weaken the confidence or trust the world have in our legal system, you risk you by definition increasing the risk, the legal risk internationally, that people say, okay, the Israelis, they just had this legal reform, constitutional reform, they weakened the court, they weakened the prosecutor, we don't trust them. So we will do the prosecution, or we will do the investigation ourselves, and this is the risk of the reform. Thanks God, it's been blocked for now, and we still have reliable procedures and institutions, and hopefully when we get there, it will stand on our side against the possible legal risk we confront after the war.
And this is just another, when we think about the war, everyone is hyper focused on Gaza, and I was at a shiva just before this webinar of one of the reservists who was killed Friday night. Went to the family out in the Gush Etzion. We're hyper focused on the war and the battle. President Biden now just talking about how he hopes that within days there will be some sort of release, maybe in swap for some of those hostages. But this legal element, which people tend to not necessarily think about, it's not at the forefront, is really a big deal and will accompany Israel and will be part of this campaign even once the actual shooting on the ground is over. So it's something definitely to keep in mind. So Shuki Friedman, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you earlier to Justice Joachim Rubinstein. To our listeners and viewers, we'll be back, of course, tomorrow. We'll have an interesting episode, I hope, on Iran and kind of looking at what the role that it has been playing and how it's been using this conflict for its own advantages. So stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow. And in the meantime, hope for a quiet evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.